We got a spicy one here today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all doing fantastic on this Friday. Normally on Fridays, we post our So I Tried Playing video series, but this week I opted for the news because this was just too big of a deal to pass up. So I wanted to prioritize this one, and we'll get back to our So I Tried Playing in 2022 video series next week. If you have any suggestions on games you want to see me play, go ahead and fire away in the comments down below in the meantime, because that series is very, very feedback oriented, so you do have an impact on it. Today, though, we're talking about the megaton news coming out of Brazil, which has to do with Microsoft's acquisition of Activision, where Brazil has okayed the deal. This isn't the first time the deal has been okayed. Saudi Arabia was the first back in August, but Brazil's okay is particularly significant because it served as the shot heard around the world when it came to some of the mudslinging happening between PlayStation and Xbox. So we're going to get into that, but more importantly, we're going to get into the comments here from Brazil's regulatory body. The reason that's important is we're talking about the biggest acquisition in the history of our industry, and this without a doubt will set the tone moving forward for future deals, including Xbox, PlayStation, whoever else. So we need to pay attention to it for that reason, but also because, and I hate to use this type of inflammatory statement, but PlayStation got destroyed here, and it's very clear who Brazil is talking about. And I'm not celebrating their downfall, but I gotta say, the spice is ramping up. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're into Xbox news and information, consider subscribing. We're happy to have you here. Now let's get to reading. So the entire regulatory body posted a multi-page document you can read for yourself. Of course, that needed to be translated, which was handled over on Reset Era. And now we have the most significant body of text to go over. Specifically, bullet points 3, 4, and 5 we're going to dive into individually. So let's get to reading and not delay any further. Number 3 says, as for the possibility of closing the game publishing market upstream, it was found that despite Microsoft having control of a relevant portion of the console and digital game distribution markets downstream, the company would not have incentives to make it difficult for publishers competing with Activision Blizzard to access its platforms, as this would necessarily imply a reduction in quantity and variety of the catalog of games available in the Xbox ecosystem, making the company's products and services less attractive to customers. So this would mean things like Xbox gets Activision, they put up the walls and say, no, we're not letting you onto our platform. I know that sounds kind of in the reverse of what we really talk about, which is just putting the gates up for the games instead, but it is something that they have to consider in the regulatory body, and they don't see any threat there. 4 and 5, however, are the more significant statements, the more significant quotes, so let's read them, because number 4 especially, I think, is a mighty big statement and implication of what could happen down the line. With regard to the possibility of closing downstream markets, the analysis pointed out that despite their relevance and popularity, Activision Blizzard games, and in particular, the Call of Duty series, would not be essential assets to the performance of Microsoft's current and potential competitors in the console and digital game distribution markets, considering in the latter, both digital stores and multiple game subscription services for the PC and consoles. Thus, even if Activision Blizzard's games catalog were to become exclusive to the Microsoft ecosystem after the transaction, SG and Cade considers that such exclusivity would not result in a substantial reduction in the levels of competition in the downstream markets, even if it could translate to a competitive advantage for Microsoft. So what they're saying here is that after this deal is done, if Microsoft were to go out and say, you know what, the deal is up for PlayStation, whatever they offered them in an extended deal that we don't know the details about, once that expires in, say, 2027, around the time we could see a new console market refresh, if Xbox wants to lock it down, Brazil is saying they could, and there wouldn't be an impact. I think Xbox in this current state would be a bit silly to do it, but I talked about this on Defining Duke on how certainly Xbox is going to create that brand association, just like PlayStation did, where people think Call of Duty when they think Xbox. You're going to see them siphon the player base gradually through Game Pass, and I think once it is the maybe 80-20 split where 80% of players are going over to Xbox and you just have to get the rest of the player base over, that's where you could lock it down. I'm not vying for that because while I was originally thinking, you know what, they're going to make it exclusive, my line of thinking, as I've documented in multiple videos, has changed over time, and I feel like this shouldn't be one that is locked down. And I feel like Xbox would be taking a lot of egg on the face if they were to go backwards on things they've been saying, the website they've posted, the declarations that they've made to the FTC and so on and so forth, saying, we're not going to make these games exclusive. They'll be available everywhere. But meanwhile, with the Bethesda deal, they said this is about getting great exclusives. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. You don't know what to trust. This does mean there is the possibility they could say, yeah, we're going to actually make this exclusive. But I think it would be a terrible look in this regard when they've promised for so long they wouldn't make things exclusive. Point being, though, is Brazil is ruling that they can keep these open and free, which does make Microsoft look a lot more benevolent in this case, because they're saying we could lock it down at Xbox, and if we did, it wouldn't have a dramatic impact. Would it make Xbox a much more competitive platform? Yes, they do note that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're pushing PlayStation or Nintendo or Tencent out of the business. So keep that in mind as we read number 5, where this is a much more direct statement to PlayStation, and again, that kind of destruction I was talking about where they do positively dismantle them. So let's read, and for some, weep. Furthermore, it is important to highlight that the central objective of CADE's activities is the projection of competition as a means of promoting the well-being of Brazilian consumers, and not the defense of the particular interests of specific competitors. After all, one cannot lose sight of the fact that the holder of the legal assets protected by Law 12,529 is the collectivity and not the competitor/economic agent as an individual entity. In this sense, although it is recognized that part of the users of the PlayStation consoles from Sony could possibly decide to migrate to Xbox in the event that Activision Blizzard games, and especially Call of Duty, become exclusive to the Microsoft ecosystem, SG/CADE does not believe that such a possibility presents in itself a risk to competition in the console market as a whole. The reason this is super noteworthy is because PlayStation, this is where they started to plead their case, is here in Brazil. It wasn't when Jim Ryan and Phil Spencer and Satya Nadella were all involved. We're obviously at that stage in the game now. This began between suits, spokespeople of both sides, saying how this deal would be unfair. This is where the statements came out, you may recall, of PlayStation claiming they could simply never make anything that could compete with this, that Call of Duty simply generates so much revenue that it's necessary for their business, based off Brazil's deduction here. And they see the papers that we don't. And obviously this is one angle, one perspective from one country, one part of the world economy. We do need to consider that as well. This may not be the same argument as the UK, which is going through a reinvestigation, the United States with the FTC, and so on and so forth. These are all different regulatory bodies who have different views on the subject. However, based off the documents, the data, everything that Brazil has seen, they have a good view of PlayStation as a business when it's impacted by Call of Duty and when it's not. And when they deem that this would not make that major of a difference, I think it symbolizes that PlayStation knows this, and they are wisely using all this ground they've been given to try to whittle away the deal here with Activision, maybe even get it canceled. But I think more than anything is just extend Call of Duty as far as you can on the console, if possible. If you can get it in perpetuity, which I don't think Microsoft would ever agree to, by the way, which means as in forever, you just get Call of Duty forever and they put it in ink and that's it, the deal is done. I don't think Microsoft would ever do that, but PlayStation is trying to see what they can get out of this, what they can wring dry from it. Certainly this deal is much more alarming to them than something like the Bethesda deal, where, as I said in a previous video, they may have looked at it and go, okay, that stinks, but what are we really losing here? The occasional Bethesda Game Studios game that sells 20 million copies over the course of a couple of years, and that's like once every 5 years. I'm sure we can figure something out in between then and now. But when it comes to Call of Duty, an annualized cash cow, that's where the urgency comes in here. But from top to bottom, Brazil's regulatory body has completely shut this down. And it's fascinating to see here, because now you have to turn your attention to, okay, it's been approved here in Brazil, the UK, the FTC, those are the ones we really have to look towards and see how those go. November in particular is going to be very interesting as more analysis starts to crawl out about this deal. But they're inching closer here. First, Saudi Arabia. I didn't think that was a really significant one. But Brazil is noteworthy again because of the mudslinging that happens between Xbox and PlayStation, where we have seen the birth before our eyes of real-life console wars. And it's definitely riled up a lot of fans. There were many fans that were displeased, PlayStation fans, that were displeased with this approach here from Brazil. But they have no horse in this race. I saw people saying, well, they're getting paid off clearly. That's not what's happening. They're doing what they think is right by the consumer. And that's the biggest takeaway for me here, is they're taking a look at this and saying, what Microsoft is doing is going to benefit consumers, and we want to protect Brazilian consumers. So if Game Pass is going to be inflated with value at its current price point, sweet, like that's what we want for our fans. But they're not interested in protecting specifically PlayStation, who has pleaded their case, because something hurting PlayStation doesn't mean that we have to trade that off for all the consumers that would benefit in the terms of value. And certainly that is the case. Activision releases a ton of games, and if you could save money on those, that does directly benefit the consumer. But as I said when speaking about Satya Nadella kind of turning a blind eye, intentionally of course, to some of the parts of the situation here, we do need to acknowledge that Microsoft, after this deal is done, if it does finish up, will have complete domination of what is effectively the cloud streaming and subscription service parts of gaming. And for some regulatory bodies, they may look at it from that angle. It's very much a people thing here. It's funny, right? People think there's a rule set, there's laws, and of course those all need to be followed and are accounted for. But people have different perspectives on all these philosophies, all these laws. And so you may see a different set of thoughts and beliefs based off what the UK is taking a look at versus what the FTC takes a look at, and so on and so forth. So it will be, as always, most fascinating to monitor this. The reason we've covered this so closely on the channel and over on Defining Duke is because this is the most seismic deal our industry has seen. There is nothing quite like this right now. And especially when it revolves around the major players in the industry, Activision, PlayStation, and Xbox, we need to track this closely because it does set the precedent for what deals are to come. And what will a smaller deal look like? What will a bigger deal look like? And what we're seeing here is what a really big deal will look like. The process, the time it's going to take, the fighting as well, the willingness to take the egg on the face if they feel enough damage is going to be done to their bottom line, to the point where Jim Ryan had reportedly taken a flight to Brussels to plead his case to the EU. That will be, I think, the more significant one. While Brazil's statement here is in particular fascinating, I think when it comes to the EU, if they shut it down and say something similar here to Brazil, to me, it's like, case closed. Obviously, if the FTC is the one who lines it up, the rest are going to be knocked down before them. But I'm just really keen to see what happens as we move forward. But with that, that's all we've got here for today's video. Just a quick Xbox Activision news update. And I'm curious to see what your thoughts on all of this are in the comments down below. So please do fire away. Let me know your thoughts. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.